Welcome back to another edition of the Hart2Heart Podcast. And today's episode is going to be a solo episode. I'm going to be focusing on how to improve cardiovascular conditioning or how to increase your VO2 max. And so when a lot of people talk about cardio, when they hear VO2 max, they think that's something that's just for athletes, but that's not the case at all. So your VO2 max or your cardio is really the number one predictor overall of longevity. So it's something that you really want to focus on. And in addition to being an overall predictor and improving your chances of living longer, it can also decrease your risk of diabetes. It can help lower stress. It can increase something called BDNF, which we're going to talk about a little bit later on. And that's really helpful for staving off various different brain diseases like Alzheimer's disease. In addition to that, it can be really helpful for staving off things like diabetes and insulin resistance and also obesity. So there's a lot of different reasons why you would want to increase your cardio or your VO2 max. Those are most of the ones that I have listed here. Obviously it's going to help increase your overall athletic performance and even your daily performance. So you're not just going to get less tired when you're working out, but you're going to get less tired just through engaging through regular day activities and chores and just the regular stresses of life. You'll be able just to withstand more, have just more of a stress tolerance and a resistance to things. But like I said, the biggest thing really is the increase in the longevity and lifespan. It's really the number one thing we have overall for improving longevity and for lengthening life. And it does this mostly through lowering our resting heart rate and blood pressure, but various other factors as well. And obviously, reducing your risk of these conditions that I mentioned, such as diabetes, obesity, insulin resistance, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, all these things contribute to death. And if you're staving off these things and preventing them from happening, then obviously that's going to contribute to living longer. So lots of different reasons why you would want to increase your VO2 max. One of the ones I probably should mention too is that it increases something called heart rate variability. A lot of people are tracking that now through Oura Ring or through various different trackers. And that's really a great indicator of how you're handling overall stress in your life. So something to track if you can. So, what I'm going to do now is kind of skip over the rest of the reasons why you may want to increase your cardiovascular health and just get into how to do it. So there's basically 5 different ways that you can increase your overall cardiovascular health. And we're going to go through all 5, but the number one way is through something called mitochondrial biogenesis. So what that means is that it's making new mitochondria. So when you make new mitochondria, you're able to generate more ATP. And as many people know, ATP is essential for our energy. So the more ATP we have, the more energy we're going to have. And so how do you increase mitochondrial biogenesis or increase the amount of ATP that you have in your body? So the number one way by far, and you're going to hear me talk about this throughout the podcast, you've probably heard this before, is something called zone 2 cardio. So what's zone 2 cardio? It's generally cardio that's done between about 60 to 70% of your max heart rate. And when people do this type of cardio, they're not really out of breath. What they can do is have a conversation with someone. It may be, slightly labored, but it's not too difficult to still have a conversation with someone. So, what does that look like? So for myself, for example, when I'm on the treadmill and I'm tracking my heart rate, what I find is that if I put the incline at about 8 and then the speed at about 3.0 miles per hour, that's usually gets me right into the perfect zone of zone 2 cardio. And so what does that do? So again, it generates more mitochondria. The more mitochondria you have, the more ATP you're going to produce, the higher your endurance is going to be. What else can it do? So it actually helps with something called fat oxidation. So what that means is that we're able to burn fat as fuel and spare the glycogen or our carbohydrate stores. And so because of that, we're able to do more work and we're able to increase our aerobic capacity and we overall just have better cardio. So it's basically spares carbohydrates as a fuel and allows us to burn more fat. One other thing that is really helpful by doing zone 2 cardio is it can be helpful for recovering between your sets or between, say, if you're doing mixed martial arts, in between rounds, or if you're playing hockey while you're sitting on the bench. It allows you to recover so you can go back out and have another great round or have another great shift. And so that's where zone 2 cardio comes into play. Now, a lot of people will say, okay, but what about, I see these Olympic athletes and they're still, running or jogging when they're exercising or when they're trying to gear up to perform or when they're training overall. So when you're looking at like an elite Olympic athlete, their zone 2 cardio is going to be far different than the average person's zone 2 cardio. So like I said, for me, 60% of my heart rate is when I'm on the treadmill at about 3.0 miles an hour at about an 8% incline. But for someone who's just incredibly conditioned, like an Olympic athlete, they may be at, 6 miles an hour at an 8 incline or, maybe even higher. And so, as you develop more and more aerobic capacity and as you get better at zone 2 training, the more you do, then your heart rate is going to lower. So your zone is going to shift. And so you're going to have to do more work or a higher speed or a higher incline to get into your zone 2. So again, for myself, I'm just, an everyday person. Sure, I work out all the time, but I'm certainly not training to be in the Olympics. And so that's where my zone 2 cardio is right now. Everyone listening to this is going to have a little bit of a different of a zone 2 cardio, but for most people, it's usually between about 110 to 140 beats per minute. And so that's the reason why you may see some of these, elite athletes, still kind of jogging or even going at a low pace when they're doing their zone 2 cardio. How much of this should you do per week? If you're looking just for general health and longevity benefits, which I think, most people are, then 120 to 180 minutes a week is optimal. So that's 2 to 3 hours of zone 2 cardio. And generally speaking, when you want to do this, you do want to do your sessions for at least about 40 minutes. So you should be doing, either 45 to 60 minutes of this, 3 times a week or so to get into an optimal range. This is what will give you, the most benefits or the best bang for your buck. If you go anything below this, you're not going to be getting all the benefits of the zone 2 cardio. Sure, you'll get some, but you're not going to be getting all of them. If you go beyond 180 minutes, you definitely still get benefits, but you're just getting a little bit less benefits for the time that you're putting in. So overall, about 120 to 180 minutes is the real sweet spot for zone 2 cardio. And like I mentioned before, you do want to keep the sessions at about 45 to 60 minutes. That seems where the adaptation of the mitochondria seems to adapt is between 40 to 60 minutes. So if you can only manage to do 30-minute workouts for whatever reason, that's still fine, but you're just not going to be able to get into the best zone where you're getting the best mitochondrial adaptation. So, when you do your zone 2 cardio, try to get it to between about 40 to 60 minutes per session. And then after that, you can spread that out as much as you like. But, again, a lot of people like to do it about 3 times a week. One thing that this does, and one of the reasons why it works, is that it triggers something called BGC1 alpha. So this is really a big signal for increase in overall mitochondrial biogenesis or increasing the amount of mitochondria that we are producing. And it can also force our slow twitch fibers just to become more energy efficient. And so because of this, that's why it's so important. And I would say that a lot of people would agree that, about 40 to 50% of your cardio, of your aerobic base and of your overall cardio is actually from zone 2. And so, this is by far the most important out of the 5 things that I'm going to talk about today. Again, this counts for 40 to 50%. So, roughly half. And, how much of it should you do compared to, say, high intensity interval training, which we're going to talk about later? Whether you talk to Dr. Peter Attia, Dr. Andrew Huberman, Mark Sisson, Dr. Andy Galpin, all these people, they all say that about 70 to 85% of your cardio should be done in zone 2. So it really should comprise most of the cardio work that you do. Again, that's not all, okay? So it's still, 15 to 30% should be done in other zones, which you're going to talk about soon. But most of your cardio should be done in zone 2. And that's because that's where you get the most bang for your buck, so to speak. Now, are there other ways to potentially increase biogenesis or mitochondrial biogenesis besides zone 2 cardio? Yes. Now, they are less efficient and not as important, but yes, there are other ways. Fasting and ketosis actually is one. And so, the big thing though with the fasting is that you don't get that much benefit after 16 hours, which is what most people do. Most of the benefit does come after 24 hours. So, it may be just something that's, fairly impractical for most people. Again, I'm not saying that you're getting zero, but it's just going to be significantly less when you're doing 16 hours versus 24 hours. Being in ketosis, again, is something that some people find, very easy to do, but some people find it to be very difficult. On that note, though, there is a little bit of a hack there. You can use BHB or various different types of exogenous ketones, and those can actually, put you into ketosis, and put you into a state where you are going to generate new mitochondria. So, it's kind of interesting that, you can do that just by using a particular supplement. But, for example, when you take it, you're generally only going to be in a ketosis state for maybe 2 to 4 hours, somewhere in that range. So it's just going to give you a small benefit overall. It's not going to give you a drastic benefit. What other ways are there that you can increase mitochondrial biogenesis? And again, we're still talking about, the number one way, the mitochondrial biogenesis and making of the new ATP. We are going to talk about the 4 other ways later. But in keeping with this particular topic, cold exposure can actually be helpful for that. Again, stimulates the same thing, the PGC1 alpha, and it can also increase your mitochondrial density. So, when your mitochondria are more dense, they're going to be able to produce more ATP. That's going to give you more energy. It's going to lead to better endurance, recovery, less fatigue, etc. How often should you be doing the cold water exposure? Basically the magic number seems to be around 11, maybe 13 minutes per week. It doesn't really matter how you do it. So if you want to do, a minute and a half to a minute of daily cold exposure in the shower, that's a reasonable way to do it. Or if you want to do, 2 5-minute cold plunges and then another, 1 minute of a cold shower one day, that's good too. So however you feel you can get it in, if that's something that you want to pursue, just try to get, around maybe 11-ish minutes per week. And that should be sufficient for giving you a little bit of a decent increase in producing new mitochondria. Other ways, this will probably be the last way that I'll talk about. And this will conclude the mitochondrial biogenesis, is going to be high rep training. So what do I mean by high reps? About 12 to 20 reps of your 1 rep max. And you're going to want to do this on things like deadlifts or squats or like sled pushes, like heavy things that, generate, that you need to use your whole body to generate. So things like, bicep curls, tricep push downs, those things aren't going to stimulate as much new mitochondria as they do when you're doing whole body workouts or whole body weights. So try to focus on things like squats and deadlifts, sled pushes, things where you're using most of your body in order to get the exercise done. And again, the range from about 12 to 20 reps. And you can do, several sets a few times a week, mix it into your strength training program. And that should be sufficient for giving you, again, another little boost and producing more mitochondria, more ATP for your body. So we've kind of covered number 1, and I'm going to move on now to number 2. But, again, number 1, the mitochondrial biogenesis, making new mitochondria, that is by far the most effective way. So that would comprise, at least 40 to 50% of your overall aerobic capacity and your ability to sustain endurance and have energy throughout the day. And also, when you're on the field or on the court or in the ring, that's where most of your cardio is going to come from. And again, 70 to 85% of your training in cardio should be done in zone 2. And again, that's recommended by all the major health experts out there. So let's talk about another way though. So let's talk about lactate threshold. And so as you know, or have you probably experienced, when you're doing certain movements, you get this burning sensation, maybe it's in your legs when you're doing leg extensions, or maybe it's, when you're running, you just have or really high intensity running, you just get this burning sensation. We hear this, the lactic acid is building up. And what you want to do is you want to increase your overall lactic acid threshold. And so instead of it, say burning after, 8 reps on an exercise, you want it to burn after 12 reps on an exercise so you can do more work. And so, how do you increase your lactate threshold? And so the best way for determining that or doing that is really doing high intensity interval training. Now, there's various different ways you can do a high intensity interval training. There's some kind of confusion over, which one is best overall. But really, when you look at the research, some of the better ways to do this are a couple different ways. But the first way I'm going to talk about is called the Norwegian method. It's the 4x4 high intensity interval protocol. And so what that is you do something that you can sustain for 4 minutes, then you take a break for 3 minutes, and then you repeat that 4 times in a row. So it should take you about 25 minutes altogether. And so one important thing about, the 4 times 3 is that in the 3, you're not coming back down to 0. You don't take it off. What you want to do is you still want to be in zone 2. So say, for example, you go on the treadmill and you discover that your zone 2 is, 8 miles an hour at an 8 incline. Then what you would want to do is that during the 3 minute period, you would want to come back down to your zone 2. Let's say you have the same zone 2 as me. So you put the treadmill back down to 3 miles an hour and you keep the incline at 8. And then that is your zone 2. And so what's that going to do is it's going to mimic, some of the things that, generally occur in sports. Like, for example, in hockey or MMA, you're obviously going very, very hard for a few minutes. And then maybe there's a little bit of like a rest. Say in MMA, for example, you may be doing an exchange with, a person. There may be some grappling going on. And then all of a sudden, you disengage and you kind of circle around the ring. Or maybe you get up from the grappling and again, you kind of circle around the ring and you're disengaged. Or maybe you're playing hockey and, you go all out for, 40 or 60 seconds, but then, you also have to come back on the bench, and you also have to have times when you're, sort of just, watching the play, so to speak, not more or less, just going all out all the time. And so what you want to do again is, do 4 minutes, more or less as hard as you can, as much as you can sustain. Then take those 3 minutes in your zone 2 cardio and do that 4 times in a row. And for this, it's something that you want to do, somewhere between 1 to 3 times per week. Again, if you're trying to follow the protocol of say, 70 to 80% in zone 2, then, just try to calculate that with how much time you're going to be spending doing the Norwegian 4x4 protocol. And so, this protocol is 25 minutes overall. And so, you can just kind of figure out, how many minutes you're going to be spending in each and determine how much will be spent in zone 2, how much will be spent in doing high intensity interval training. And so that's where you want to place most of your training. I am going to talk about, just slightly about zone 3 and zone 4 cardio, but, what you want to do is really be in, a good high intensity range. So about 90 to 95% of your max heart rate when you're doing those 4 minutes. That's what's going to be most efficient overall. And so that's what I would really recommend doing. And again, it doesn't take too long, 25 minutes. One thing many people ask is, can you do it after you do your zone 2? Absolutely. That's a great thing to kind of just minimize time overall. And then the other thing is that you're already warmed up, so you're, significantly less likely to get injured. Other methods you can do, some people really like the Tabata method. So the Tabata method would be, it's actually just a 4-minute workout. So you go all out. So all out, like as fast as you possibly can for 20 seconds. A lot of people do this on an Airdyne bike. Those are those bikes that you see where people are grabbing the handles and it generates air through like a fan on the bottom. And so, they're using your upper body, you're using your lower body, and you're just going absolutely all out. So you do that for 20 seconds and 10 seconds off. And then you repeat this for 8 cycles. So you do 4 minutes of this. And a lot of people do find that to be an incredibly effective workout overall for also increasing their overall lactate threshold. And so those are, more or less some of the better methods and more practical methods that people have used to increase the overall lactate threshold. What I'm going to move on to now actually is I'm going to talk about a couple different supplements that can increase your lactate threshold. One of them I think is, very commonly used, but commonly used incorrectly. And, I've been guilty of doing this before. So the one I'm going to talk about is called beta-alanine. And so beta-alanine is something that is often included in various different pre-workouts, and it's touted as something that can be helpful for, buffering lactic acid, which it can be. But the thing is that it doesn't really matter when you take your beta-alanine. I've made this mistake of, just taking it pre-workout. And the other thing with beta-alanine is it does cause a little bit of tingling, which can be a little bit uncomfortable for people. So if you want to get into the supplement, I really recommend just taking a small amount, like maybe like 1 gram per serving, and then spreading that out throughout the day. So you want to go to about 3 to 6 grams. If you can go on the upper side of 5 to 6 grams, you're probably going to get a little bit more benefit overall. And what that's going to do is it's going to help buffer your lactic acid. So the beta-alanine turns into something called carnosine, and the carnosine is really the thing that's going to help buffer your lactic acid. And so by buffering your lactic acid, you're going to increase your lactate threshold, and then that burning sensation that you feel isn't going to come as quick. So again, just going back to an example, if you're doing leg press or leg extensions, maybe it comes, you get that burning sensation at, rep 12 instead of rep 8. Obviously that'd be a fantastic response, but even if you just get a couple extra reps, I think it would be worth to at least experiment with if you want to do it. Again, you don't have to do that. And definitely, the best methods are doing the high intensity interval training and the couple different protocols that I just discussed. But overall, it's still a very, very effective strategy for, giving you a little bit of a boost in your overall ability to handle lactic acid and to increase lactate threshold. Another supplement that can be used to help actually increase lactate threshold is something called citrulline malate. So citrulline malate has gained a lot of attention in the last decade or so. It's used in a lot of different pre-workout products because it can help increase nitrous oxide production and give yourself a little bit of a pump. So it actually is great before strength training and also endurance training. But it can also help clear ammonia and help clear out lactate. And so because of this, it's going to help buffer that zone and going to help increase your overall lactate threshold. And so people sometimes underdose with this. You're going to want to get about 6 to even 10 grams of citrulline malate to really give you a good effect. And again, that is something that can be used to help increase your lactate threshold. And unlike beta-alanine, which needs to be built up in the body over time, and I probably should have mentioned there with the beta-alanine that you may not notice an effect right away. Some people don't notice an effect for 2 to even 4 weeks later. And so, what you want to do is really load the beta-alanine. So, take that 1 to 2 grams, whatever you can tolerate, 2 to 3 times a day. If it's something that you can really only tolerate in small amounts, you may have to take it even more often. But coming back to the citrulline malate generally is just used before your workout. So, about 30 minutes or so before your workout, seems to be maybe 15. It seems to be sort of the optimal window in order for you to get the best benefits from using citrulline malate for clearing the lactic acid and increasing your overall lactate threshold. So something that I think, is not as effective as the protocols as the high intensity interval training protocols, but still something that you could use to potentially give you just a little bit more of a boost overall. I'm going to talk a little bit too about, CO2 training and some holds and things like that later on. But I'm going to skip over that for now, but that is something that can be helpful for increasing your lactate threshold as well. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move on to item number 3. So we've talked about the mitochondrial biogenesis. Like I said, that probably counts for maybe 40 to 50% of your overall aerobic capacity. The lactate threshold, still extremely important, maybe 20 to 25%. So not nearly as much as mitochondrial biogenesis, like literally just half as important, but still critically important overall. And again, when you are doing the high intensity interval training, you want it to be between about 15 to maybe 30% of your overall work of doing cardio. Most of your cardio should be focused on zone 2. That's what's going to give you the most bang for your buck. Let's move on to number 3. So this would be the third most important factor in determining your overall aerobic capacity and improving your VO2 max. And this is going to be your stroke volume and your cardiac output. So basically, how much blood volume can your left ventricle pump out? And then the more blood volume that your left ventricle can pump out, the more oxygen is going to be available to you. And so again, this would be about the third most important factor overall. So not as important as making new mitochondria and not as important as increasing your lactate, but still critically important. Maybe about 15 to 20% of your overall aerobic capacity does come from your stroke volume and your cardiac output. So, how do you increase your stroke volume and your cardiac output? How do you maximize the third method? Well, again, there's going to be some overlap here between some of the ways to improve the various different ways of cardio when I'm talking about the big 5 ways. So zone 2 cardio, again, is going to be effective for this. Zone 3 cardio is also going to be effective for this. So with zone 2, like I said, it's usually calculated at about 60 to 70% of your heart rate max. Zone 3 is more about 70 to maybe 80% of your heart rate max. But those things can be extremely effective for increasing your overall ability to pump out more blood. And what it does is it forces your left ventricle to expand. And when your left ventricle, that's the part of your heart that pumps out blood, when that expands, you're able to pump out more blood, get more oxygen, and have more fuel and more energy. And so are there other ways besides, just doing zone 2 cardio? Yes, there are other ways. So this is really where some strength training does come into play. So we do know that, strength training does have some role in increasing your overall cardiovascular or aerobic health as well. And when doing this, or when the best way to do this is really through heavy leg training, and you want to do the rest between about 5 to 12. So what that's going to do is it's going to increase your venous return. So when you increase your venous return, you're going to get more blood going back into your heart and into your left ventricle. And that's just going to keep that blood moving and pumping out more and more. And so by increasing your venous return, by doing these squats and deadlifts in that range of about 5 to 12, you're going to increase your overall aerobic capacity and your VO2 max. And so, you do want to do this at least once a week. More than that may cause a little bit of fatigue or delayed onset muscle soreness in your legs. So, it's not something that you want to do all the time, or as often as say high intensity interval training or zone 2 cardio, but, doing it at least once a week can be a great way to improve your overall stroke volume and improve the overall way that you can get more blood into your body and get that oxygen going. What other ways can we improve our stroke volume? So, you've probably heard of people doing high altitude training before. So people like going to like the Rockies or places where, they're at a higher altitude than normal. And so, this is a way to, again, increase your stroke volume. That's how it influences your cardio and makes your overall cardio better. So for some people, or for, the large majority of people listening to this, going into a high altitude place is not something that's easily accessible or easily done. And so what a lot of people use is the high altitude training masks, and they can be effective. Now, it's not the exact same thing as being in a high altitude, but what it does do is that it can increase the amount of CO2 that you have. So we know that when we take in a breath, we're breathing in oxygen and then we're breathing out CO2. So when we have one of these masks on, basically we have more and more CO2, and that's going to increase when we're training like that. It's going to increase our overall CO2 tolerance. And by increasing our CO2 tolerance, we can therefore increase our overall stroke volume and get more oxygen out into our blood. And so something that a lot of people have found to be helpful is using certain masks that they can wear at the gym. And I know they certainly look funny. I've never worn one to a gym before. I definitely wear one in my basement if I had one, which is something that, I may get soon. But that can definitely be helpful overall for just increasing your aerobic capacity. And so in terms of the way to do that, a lot of people will use these, not when they're walking around or anything like that, or even when they're necessarily doing certain strength training movements, but they'll do it a lot when they're doing their cardio. And so when you do your cardio and you have this type of mask on, again, you can get a little bit of benefit from this, just because it does have the ability to improve CO2 clearance and our oxygen efficiency. And so it's something that, certainly high level athletes use. It's not something that a lot of people use, but if you are interested, there are some benefits to it. But again, it's not like true hypoxia, like the altitude training. It doesn't reduce the oxygen percentage in the air, but it restricts the total of air volume that we can actually inhale. And that's going to increase our CO2 level, which is going to improve our CO2 tolerance and our oxygen efficiency. So something to consider for sure if you're, just trying to maximize everything. The last way that we can increase our overall stroke volume and improve cardiac function is through heat therapy or sauna. So, doing this 3 to 4 times a week, say for 15 to 30 minutes, can be really helpful. If you want to do more, you can do more. I do the sauna, all the time, even if I didn't have, the benefits of an increased stroke volume from sauna, I would still do it just because it makes me feel better. I love the overall mental health benefits of it. But when you do the heat therapy or the sauna, that's going to increase your overall plasma volume or your blood volume. And by having more blood volume, you're going to boost your overall cardiac efficiency. And so that kind of concludes the ways that you can increase your overall stroke volume and cardiac output. And so now we've discussed mitochondrial biogenesis, we discussed lactate threshold, and now we've discussed stroke volume and increasing your cardiac output. So I'm going to move on now to number 4. Number 4 is, again, not as important as number 3. We're going in order here. So this is going to be something called your capillary density and oxygen transport. And so basically, the more capillaries you have, the more blood supply you're going to have, the more oxygen you're going to be able to deliver to your muscles, and the more energy you're going to be able to have. And so, there's really only one really effective way for increasing your overall capillary density and oxygen transport, and that's going to be through high rep training. And so by high reps, I mean about 12 to 20 reps. And again, what exercises should you focus on for doing this? Again, more like the big power movements, so squats, deadlifts, sled pulls, things like that. those things where you're using most of your whole body or whole body exercises, those are going to be a lot more effective than say something like, preacher curls or bicep curls or tricep push downs. Those aren't going to generate as much new capillaries, or what we call angiogenesis, the making of new capillaries. And so for that, some people can tolerate a little bit more. They can do it, a couple times a week. They find they don't get sore, but there's other people who find that when they do higher reps, they actually get even more sore than when they do lower reps. So it's really something that you kind of just have to, play around with overall. I would start off just doing, maybe 3 sets a week at 12 to 20 reps and see how you do with that. And then again, combine that with doing, some lower reps, like in the 5 to 12 range, maybe more like the 5 to 8 range. And then that way you're getting the benefits of getting, the increased venous return, like we talked about, so the increased blood coming back up to the left ventricle. And then you're also getting more capillaries, and which is going to be able to deliver more oxygen. And so, combining those 2 rep ranges can be really helpful overall. And so in terms of, moving on to number 5 here, the thing that we're going to talk about with number 5, and again, this will probably be, the least important overall, but again, most people listening to this are really trying to maximize everything here. That's going to be your respiratory efficiency and your CO2 tolerance. So, I mentioned earlier, that I was going to come back to this, and it's because, this kind of plays in a little bit with almost all 5 factors, but in itself, it's almost a factor in its own is, CO2 tolerance and respiratory efficiency. And so, probably the best way to increase this overall is really through nasal breathing. There are some techniques out there where you can, do certain kind of like hypoxic breathing and other things like that. But, in order to, save time and be efficient and to be a little bit practical, basically the best way to increase this is through doing nasal breathing during your zone 2 cardio. So, that way you don't have to do anything after, you don't have to do anything before, you don't have to add anything more to your day. You can just do this exercise while you're doing your zone 2 cardio. And so, for some people, they find that it's very, very natural to breathe through the nose. I don't really overall. I am a little bit of a mouth breather. I'm not too bad. I find I kind of do a little bit of both, probably in the middle. But still, I wish I could, maximize it a little bit better. And so for some people, they just find that what they can do is just simply breathe through their nose when they're, doing their zone 2 cardio. They don't have to do anything else. They don't have to concentrate on anything else. It's just something that kind of comes fairly effortlessly. For other people, the best way to really force yourself to do nasal breathing during zone 2 cardio is through mouth taping. And so when you're starting off doing this, if you do choose to do mouth taping, tape your mouth, as you're doing your zone 2 cardio. And then if you can only handle a couple minutes, you can only handle a couple minutes, then you can take it off, then you can put it back on the tape I'm talking about, just do basically as much as you can. And, try to add up the total minutes that you've been able to do with the tape each time. And then once you have some kind of baseline or some kind of number, try to increase that with each workout or with each week. So again, some people, will say you should try to get better, from workout to workout. And, that's a great goal. And I think, it's a good goal, but, even if you're just getting a little bit better, week to week, month to month, that's also something that can be very, very helpful for you overall. And so that really is the best way to, increase your respiratory efficiency and CO2 tolerance. Like I said, though, there are some other ways, but they would just take more time outside of doing what we just discussed. Because like I said, if you're doing the nasal breathing during your zone 2 cardio, which is the most effective way, then you don't necessarily have to concentrate on other ways if you don't want to. But you can do like some inspiratory muscle training. There's various different devices out there. There's like Power Breathe and Aerofit. None of these am I, affiliate with in any way, shape, or form, but there are some things out there that can help you breathe and help increase your inspiratory muscles, which obviously will help you breathe a little bit better. And when you're breathing better and using those inspiratory muscles, you're going to have better cardio, better oxygen delivery overall. And then some people will also do CO2 tolerance drills or breath drills. So basically they'll do these exhale holds for 30 to 60 seconds post-workout. Again, if it's something that you like doing or you want to do or look into doing, by all means, go ahead and do it. But it's just something that you're going to have to add. Whereas when you're doing the nasal breathing during the zone 2 cardio, you're already doing that. And so, why complicate things, a little bit more? And so those are more or less the main ways to increase your overall cardio. Okay. So we have the mitochondrial biogenesis, which is by far the best way. And the way that you do that is through zone 2 cardio. That's again, the best way, but there are the other ways that we've mentioned. Then increasing your overall lactate tolerance, your ability to, buffer lactic acid. And that's mostly done through high intensity interval training. But again, we did talk about other things in that, like doing, taking some beta-alanine, some citrulline malate, those types of things. And I should mention too that, CO2 training, some of that breath work can increase your lactate threshold as well. So, important to note there. And then also the CO2 threshold, the CO2 tolerance drills can also be helpful for building a little bit more mitochondria. So number 1 and 2. So it kind of does mix in with everything. And then number 3, we have, increasing your stroke volume or your cardiac output. So, by doing, things with regards to, zone 2 cardio, again, that's going to be super helpful. We talked a little bit about, heavy leg training as well. Number 4 is going to be your capillary oxygen and the oxygen transport. And so, the best method for that is going to be high rep trainings, that 12 to 20 rep range. And then number 5, like I said, that kind of deserves a little spot of its own. It's going to be respiratory efficiency and CO2 tolerance. And that's going to be done generally by doing nasal breathing. It's going to be your best method there. And so, those are the more or less the best ways to increase your overall cardio. Are there other ways, and are there other items that or supplements that you can use? Yes, there are. Like creatine, for example, is something that can help give you a little bit more ATP. And so some people find that when they use more creatine, they have more ATP, they have more energy, and thereby it does increase their cardio. So, that's helpful. Beetroot extract, there's conflicting studies on whether or not that can increase your hemoglobin a bit. So when you increase your hemoglobin, that's the amount of oxygen that you can deliver to your cells. You're going to be able to get a little bit more energy. So you may have heard something called EPO before. So EPO is something that people have been taking, exogenously, and we do produce this as well. But people do take this, exogenously. It's very, very, very dangerous, and it's on every banned substance list. I would never, ever, ever recommend it. It's what, if you're familiar with UFC, TJ Dillashaw got caught for doing it, and he got a 2-year ban, I believe. And anyways, that can also dramatically increase your CBC or your CBC as well, but your hemoglobin. And by increasing your hemoglobin, you are going to get more oxygen delivering to your cells, and you're going to have more energy. And then interestingly enough, there are a couple peptides out there now. So there's one called, I believe it's MOTC. I forget what the exact name for it is. I believe that's the acronym, probably something mitochondrial. Anyways, that can actually increase mitochondrial biogenesis. Again, this is very, very experimental. It's not something that I'm recommending. I'm just mentioning it for completing the whole discussion of the subject. But people have been experimenting with that. Some people have gotten some great results. Some people not so much. But They feel that that's something that can increase mitochondrial biogenesis, the making of new mitochondria, and that can help overall with cardio. Again, if you're going to do something like this, you want to go to a reputable doctor or get it from a compounding pharmacy. It's not something you just want to like experiment with online in any way, shape, or form. And I believe there's another peptide called SS31, and that also helps with mitochondria, not so much by generating new mitochondria, but by protecting the ones that you have. And so some people are using that in a post-recovery way, and it helps with the mitochondrial function overall. And so, again, when you're looking at peptides and experimental things, you do want to be really, really careful. And if you are thinking about using these things, please, please, please just use it through a doctor. Don't buy something online where you could potentially injure yourself. And like I said, too, the real big things, real big methods here that we talked about today are really coming back to, the zone 2 cardio, the high intensity interval training, doing some high rep training, doing some medium to low rep training. So 5 to 12 reps and 8 to 12 reps, and then also doing some nasal breathing. Those things are the really things where you're going to get the most bang for your buck overall. So that more or less concludes my discussion that I had for today, or for this podcast. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. If there's anything that I missed, please let me know. Send me a message in the comments. I'm going to be posting this obviously on, Twitter, YouTube, everywhere else. Just leave a message or a comment if there's something that I missed or a question that you have. And I'll try to do my best to answer that question. And obviously, if there's ways that I left out, I'd love to learn more about ways that have improved your cardio overall. Because as I discussed at the beginning of the podcast, it's not just about endurance. It's not just about lasting long in the gym or in the ring or anything like that. It's about your overall health. And by increasing your VO2 max, you are going to increase your overall longevity. You're going to increase the amount of energy that you have in your life, and you're just going to improve your overall quality of life. So thank you so much, everyone, for listening. I really do appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed this discussion. And as always, I'll be back with another podcast soon.